the Democrats control Congress, right? So Milley and everyone else who comes to testify, they want to say things the Democrats like because they control their appropriations, right? Like they're sort of doing internal politics as well, and within Washington D.C. It's fine if Tom Cotton gets mad at them. Tom Cotton has presidential aspirations, though, right? He's not necessarily the guy who's going to be in charge of the next budget. The Democrats going to be in charge of the next budget. I think that there's the HR strategy, which is they have this perception about who they're recruiting. 2, there's the internal domestic politics of DC. And 3, sometimes people in government just aren't the smartest people in the world. Like, there probably are some people in government who think that if they read Robin DiAngelo, they'll be able to find white supremacists in the military, which, by the way, there have been instances of that. There was actually very recently an instance of an ex-Marine and I believe a sheriff in Georgia being arrested by the FBI or someone in the federal government for some kind of white supremacist plot. So, those things do exist, although you're not, it isn't a great guide to them to read whatever's hot in pop culture right now necessarily.
Right. Well, first and foremost, we have to remember that Joe Biden won South Carolina because more white voters turned out than historically was precedented, right? Joe Biden won South Carolina on the backs of white turnout. Now, of course, an overwhelming majority of Black voters also voted for South Carolina in the state. And those voters overwhelmingly said that Jim Clyburn's endorsement was the dispositive factor for them. So you can't erase that reality either. But you also have to be careful to look at the fact that Jim Clyburn is influential with voters. What Nina Turner is experiencing right now is an uptick in fundraising, something that Bernie Sanders also had no issue with. But she still has to make sure that she is convincing voters on the ground in Ohio who might, despite her ability to raise a large number of funds from across the country from people who know and love her from the Bernie campaign, might not have the same kind of traction in the state. Now, polls indicate that Nina Turner is actually polling very well in the state, which is why I think you're having this last minute rush from these national corporate politicians to try to boost her opponent. I don't think that that's a real concern. My family happens to be from Cleveland, and she's been a household name for a long time, much longer than, frankly, Bernie Sanders has been a household name to them. But yes, I do think we have to keep our eye on the fact that what we're talking about here is a spike in fundraising, not necessarily what we saw in South Carolina, which was people who know Jim Clyburn, feel they can know Jim Clyburn and can trust Jim Clyburn, and who followed his guidance on who to vote for in the presidential primary.
It's pretty incredible, the inability to make distinctions between saying something like, well, I don't think somebody should be kicked off the internet for talking about this, and I really think this is a miracle cure that's going to solve the pandemic. Like, there's a pretty enormous delta between those two concepts, but in the internet age, people have lost the ability to make those distinctions. And as a result, there have been, some pretty incredible decisions that have been made, politically about this, and within companies like Google and Facebook. Just this week, Brett Weinstein is a pretty significant independent media presence. He was demonetized on YouTube, finally, among other things for talking about this. And it's become an extremely difficult thing to navigate, I think, for journalists, because it's a legitimate news story. I talked about these incidents where there are people in hospitals who are suing their hospitals to allow them to treat with that ivermectin. And, no matter what you think about the drug, you should at least be able to tell those stories and explore what happened. But it's become dangerous to do it. And so that's an extra consideration that journalists now have to take in to account.